we see the output, we see the labor, we see the productivity, we see the stability that women create. But what we don't see is the cost of doing it without healthcare research or solutions that take gender specificity into account.
I'm Ann Marie McQueen, journalist and proud 50-ish woman, and we are here looking for the true truth in perimenopause, menopause, midlife, and beyond.
Opening our minds to other possibilities is not always easy.
Hotflash Inc.
You're all woman to me. All right, Ann Marie.
Welcome to the Hotflash Inc. podcast. I'm your host, Ann Marie McQueen. My guest today is Maryann Selfe, who spent 2 decades in private banking advising the ultra-wealthy before realizing how little capital is flowing into women's health. She's the founder of Femme Health Alliance, author of the forthcoming book, The $1 Billion Blind Spot, editor of the popular Substack of the same name, where 12,000 people follow her writing on women's health, midlife, and the economics behind it. Today, we're talking about the invisible economy of midlife, what happens when our bodies change, our careers shift, and our health finally demands a seat at the table, and how the investment world is ever so slowly waking up to this reality. I encourage you to check out the new fact check section in the podcast notes. This is where if a guest says something like, I think, I'm not sure, I'll go check it and put it in there. And if there's a term that I think like not everyone would know, I'll explain it. That's a new feature and I'm pretty excited about it. And while I'm at it, I want to give a shout out to MenoLabs. They were one of the gold sponsors of my first ever Hotflash Inc. Summit, which is coming back this year. MenoLabs is here to support you in perimenopause with a range of science-backed products like their bestseller, MenoFit. This is a probiotic designed to help you get relief from perimenopause and menopause symptoms, including hot flashes and night sweats. It's all about that gut. Right now, they're offering our Hotflash Inc. listeners 20% off using code HOTFLASH20 at menolabs.com. That's code HOTFLASH20 at menolabs.com. That's HOTFLASH20 at menolabs.com. Now on to my interview with Maryann Selfe. When you sort of entered the chat and just entered my field of awareness, I thought this is something that's really neat. And it's kind of something that I had been trying to do, but like you can't do everything, right? And so I'm really impressed. I'm going to ask you about a couple of your Substacks that you've written, but you're creating this whole ecosystem to nurture and expand this space. And it's so needed. It's just so neat to see women sort of filling in the gaps because that's what we do, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's just start out by talking because you were in private banking. That's how you ended up in Zurich. I would imagine that's a lucrative, difficult, exciting, all the things field. But what made you shift from that into focusing on women's health and funding in women's health?
It is, you're right. It is exciting. I mean, I've been in private banking, investment banking, finance for almost 25 years. Now I give away my age, and it is interesting and exciting and all the things you said. And I'm still in private banking. What I've just kind of done is shift my focus to working on women's health. And I think it's kind of like not that I woke up one day and I decided, okay, this is it now. I want to work in women's health. I think like most of us in this space, I've talked to a lot of people who are doing really amazing things in women's health. And I think one thing that always stands out is a lot of us come into this space through our own stories, and for me that it really started with my own body. And I was in this phase of very much in that high functioning phase, your 30s. I like to think of it like the kind of doing all of the things phase, career, family, everything. You're kind of like superwoman, multitasking, doing everything badly, potentially. And I started struggling with uterine fibroids. I was having heavy bleeding, fatigue, pain, like really bad pain. It's all the things that we have been socialized to put up with quietly over the years. And for so many years, I just kind of dealt with it and did all the things that you're kind of supposed to do. I went to doctors. I talked to, my care professionals. I asked questions. I read leaflets. And I think I just kept hearing some version of, well, we don't really know, because I think I was trying to understand where does this come from? And is there something I can do to minimize the pain or slow down the rate of progression or whatever? And I just kind of kept hearing some version of, well, we don't really know why this happens, but here's a couple of options to manage, your pain and fatigue and all the things that you're dealing with. And oh, by the way, none of the options we're giving you are great, right? And that kind of really stopped me because I think the way my brain is wired, I really wanted to understand the mechanism. I studied science, so I studied chemistry as a degree. My first degree was in chemistry. So I'm really wired that way to understand how things work. What's the mechanism? What's the chemical reaction that's happening? And I think the more I kind of dug into the literature, I think that's when I began to realize that, well, hang on a second, we don't really understand the etiology of fibroids. I think that kind of hit me like a truck. We don't really know why some people get it, some women get it, some don't, why they grow the way they do. And then when I kind of looked at, of course, the options that were made available to me, the treatment options are often invasive and blunt. And there's just so much gaps in the research, and especially for women of color who seem to, be more predisposed to this problem than others. And that's kind of where the investment specialist in me kind of kicked in because I'm thinking, well, hang on a second. We're talking about a condition that affects not just me, it's millions of women that can, I mean, it's not going to kill you. Well, it might if you wait long enough, right? But it can completely derail your quality of life. And the science and the solutions are this underdeveloped. And that's when my investor brain kicked in because when you see something, when you see a problem that's hugely common, it's very costly and it's hardly served. You don't just see a problem. That right there is a mispriced opportunity because nature hates a vacuum. And if I think about the theory of efficient markets, then markets are efficient. So people will start developing solutions to close those gaps. And then at some point, the markets will reprice and those solutions, will be valuable. So that's kind of what I saw. I saw a market that was not well priced. And, my whole career in finance has been about identifying investment solutions for clients, of course, that are aligned with their investment objectives, their risk appetite, and importantly, the base of everything, the fundamental basis is identifying where the market has mispriced something.
Maryann, just
Yeah.
for those of us who aren't as financially literate, when you say the market mispriced it, what do you mean specifically?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we see in women's health is we have a funding problem. So we don't have a lot of capital coming into the space. And that's to make it, if I wanted to make it like really simple, that would be the basis for mispricing. If I think about sort of the AI craze that we have at the moment, if you have a solution which is an AI software as a service, you can raise funding very quickly because the market recognizes that there is value here. And if I invest into this, I'm going to have a return, a financial return at some point in the future. But with women's health, we're not seeing investment or we're not seeing capital coming into women's health. And that is for a number of reasons, but at the top level is I don't believe enough that this is going to give me a financial return. So I better deploy my capital someplace else.
Yeah.
And that's the mispricing.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
Just sticking with fibroids, because I also had a fibroid. I also was obsessed like you were. At so many points in my life have been told, like, we don't know, we're not sure, there's nothing you can do with the things I had. And also Black women will end up getting more hysterectomies when they don't need them from a fibroid. We also know that. Is it not lucrative and is it not embedded in the insurance like hospital model that you're doing the treatments for the fibroids? This is like a standard situation, and to enter that space that is so sort of, medicine can be very old fogey, very slow to change medicine. And so asking you in a really roundabout way, is that part of the problem as well? That you have a situation, you have the way you handle it, it's not great, but no one has come in to kind of disrupt it?
It's a very good question. I think it's a number of things, as you rightly mentioned. Um, and to the point that you're making, that is one of the issues that we see, the whole change. So when you have a certain way of doing things, particularly in medicine, doctors and the whole healthcare system is really unwilling to change, particularly when you're talking about solutions that require changes to the workflow, because there you need to train healthcare professionals. And frankly, that, first of all, the healthcare system is very strained. In almost every country in the world, healthcare system costs have skyrocketed. Governments are desperately trying to control healthcare costs. So when you're coming in with a new solution that disrupts an existing protocol, which is known, which all of the staff are trained to follow that protocol. You have workflows that are fully embedded with this is how we do things. And you're trying to disrupt that. You're asking for the system to change around your solution. That's like hitting your head against the wall. And we also see this, I mean, as a healthcare investor, one of the things I look out for when I'm evaluating or doing due diligence on a solution, I ask one question, and the question I ask is this solution going to fit in with the existing protocol that we have or protocols that we have in the healthcare system? Because if that's a yes, and I write about this in my book, actually, which is coming out, but if that's a yes, then you're dealing with a different problem than a solution that needs that the system changes around it. Now, there is no right or wrong, none of the two are wrong. It's just that as an investor, you need to understand what you're dealing with, because those are two completely different animals. One will need a longer time, to fruition, and the other will be much faster to get adoption. But yes, to your point, that is also one of the challenges that we see.
You've said that women are the invisible economy. What do you mean by the invisible economy? Is that in the work that they're doing in the economy? Is that in how they're treated by the economy, or is it all of it?
Yeah, so I wrote an article about this, and I think I haven't had a lot of virality on Substack, but this was one article that went absolutely viral. And I think it resonated with people on so many different levels. When I say that midlife women are an invisible economy, I think what I mean, first of all, I refer really to midlife. So not all women, but women in the midlife. And I don't mean invisible as in small. I mean invisible as in taken for granted. I think if we think about it, between sort of the ages of, and I'm making a huge generalization here, but I think from the ages of, say, maybe around about 35 or even maybe 30 for some people, you're at that point where you're holding up entire systems. You have households, teams at work, aging parents, kids, nephews, nieces, cousins, communities. And yet, if we kind of look at the support structures that we have around our health, it hasn't really caught up with the reality of what we do, and that's kind of what I mean by invisible economy. And the more I looked into it, the more I thought, well, hang on a second. Women don't stop contributing at midlife. It almost looks like the system stops recognizing it. I mean, if you think about it, how many women who are brilliant at their jobs, they're running families, they're carrying emotional labor, they're financially supporting loved ones. They're usually the burden of caregiving falls more to women. And they're doing all of that, while dealing with sleep disruption, brain fog, perimenopause symptoms, undiagnosed conditions. We used to joke about it at work with my colleagues. It's like a guy will have a headache and it's like it's the end of the world. But a woman will have a headache and she's getting on with it. And I think that's what I mean by invisible. We see the output. We see the labor, we see the productivity, we see the stability that women create. But what we don't see is the cost of doing it without healthcare research or solutions that take gender specificity into account. One of the things, I made a post a couple of weeks ago on TikTok, and that resonated with quite a lot of people, because I was talking about the fact that insomnia affects 2 times more women than men. But if we look at the clinical trials for insomnia drugs that were done before the 2000s, most of those trials include actually 60% of those trials included only men. And so women's physiology and women happen to be the people who carry that burden, the burden of insomnia, of that problem. But the medication and the treatments that we have, solutions we have for insomnia, were not actually designed for the female physiology. So you have medication out there that is had to be recalled by the FDA because when women started testing it in real life, which is only after the drugs have been approved, we find out that it's actually not right for our physiology.
Yeah.
So that's, I think if I had to kind of summarize it, I would say, women, especially women in midlife, um, are doing like GDP level work with primary school level support.
Oh, wow. What do you make of the women leaving the workforce due to menopause? What would you call it? Trend or coverage of the trend, which I never really know if it actually is a trend or if it's coverage of the trend, because I've been a journalist and I know you can make a trend out of almost anything. And I do know that numbers in the UK were overblown tremendously, like The Guardian
Yes.
published based on this Bupa survey. I mean, it was blown up to 1 million women are leaving the workforce in the UK. It's women are leaving the workforce, but I wondered what you made of it from your perspective.
I think for me, it's difficult to get a sense around the numbers because, as you rightly said, I think that the numbers for that research were kind of blown, out of proportion. But I think what we see is that you get to this point in your career, and I'll tell you a story which my doctor shared with me. But I went to her because I was trying to also get a sense around menopausal symptoms that I was dealing with. I couldn't sleep. I was having hot flushes. And, you're sitting in a meeting and you forget words mid-sentence. And for someone, especially type A personality, who's used to operating at a certain level, begins to affect your confidence and you think, well, what's going on with me? What's happening here? So I was talking to my doctor about it and she shares this story of a friend of hers who happens to be a judge. And she's sitting at the courtroom in her outfit with the wig on her head. And suddenly she's sitting there, she's going through this hot flush and she is sweating profusely. She's terribly uncomfortable. And she's literally is sitting down. She's sweating and just praying that it passes. But I think what I'm trying to say is that for quite a lot of women, you get to this point in your career where you have few decades of experience under your belt. You are probably at the peak of your career. You are very experienced, you're very talented, but you're at this point where you're dealing with physiological changes that sometimes you probably don't even understand where they're coming from or what's, how to manage these properly. You don't really have any support network because maybe you're not really talking about it. I mean, thanks to the work that you're doing, Ann Marie, we have platforms like yours where we can actually, we have more and more women who are talking about this. But a couple of years ago, not a lot of people are talking about it. So you don't really have that support network. And you also begin to secretly doubt yourself and it impacts your confidence. And so if we take that sort of confluence of factors into account, it's no wonder that some women don't feel supported. And instead of getting maybe a bad review, they just decide, you know what, maybe this isn't for me anymore. Maybe I need to slow down. Maybe I need to change track, and so on. And we already know that, I think, as women in the workplace, particularly in certain sectors which are more masculine than others, there's not a lot of you women at that level. Probably at this point, you're quite a senior woman. So first of all, there's not a lot of you to begin with. Number two, you're operating in a very male-dominated environment, and you begin to doubt yourself. And I think research also shows that women tend to not be as confident as men in the workplace. So we're not the ones that are going to be going around talking about, look how great we are. So there's already that, just, you're already on the back foot, and then you're dealing with condition, or you're dealing with a transition, which is a biological inevitability for every woman who will get to a certain point in her life without any support, or without a lot of support. And that can have an impact on how you perceive yourself, on your own confidence, and might lead to attrition in the workplace. And I think it's also one of the reasons why I speak a lot about it, particularly from an employer point of view. And I say, if you, as an investor, or if you were running a business, and 20% of your workforce, or 20% of your companies that you invest into, were having a problem, you'd listen, you'd pay attention, you'd try to fix it. And that's also the same way that employers and those of us who are leaders and managers need to think about this. You have midlife women are probably the most qualified, um, talent, talented bench of people that you have in your organization. And you've probably spent a ton supporting them, investing into them, into that talent to that point. So for an employer, it makes absolute sense to think about, what is it that we can do to support you through this transition, which is something that every female employee that we have will go through at some point in their lives.
And in banks, do you think that they really care? We hear a lot about companies that are implementing menopause workplace policies. That was a really big thing a couple of years ago when that wave started. It was in the UK, and I don't know. I don't know if it's not something people announce. I don't know if they're doing it quietly. I just wondered what your take was.
I think we also see the shift. And in my view, I truly believe that this women's health isn't a fad. It's in 10 years, it will be a lot more mainstream than it is today. And I truly also believe, I think my thesis is that part of the groups that will be driving this change to make women's health more mainstream is, I mean, there is, of course, women themselves who are more empowered today economically and so on, so they can pay for solutions that improve their quality of life. But I truly believe the big driver will be driven by corporates who are paying for and adopting workplace policies and support, or tools and frameworks that better support their employees through this transition. So we're seeing more and more of companies doing that, also in the financial industry. I think it's JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley, I believe they have something. They've implemented workplace policies that support midlife women or midlife careers. So we see this trend happening, and I think that actually it's not a nice to have. I truly believe that it's a productivity enhancer. At the end of the day, we are in this wave where I think with the younger generation, we're now seeing it more of a move towards, the work-life balance. Younger people don't want to work the way we did, going to the office and spending 100-hour weeks in the office, which is great for the younger people. They really have got their priorities right and together. So kudos to them for doing that. But I truly also believe that economically as well, we see what's happening across the world, in the UK, in the US. From an economic standpoint, countries are in a difficult place. Corporates as well are trying very hard to improve their bottom line, to remain competitive. And a key part of that is your people, it's your talent bench. So it's not a nice to have to implement policies that support midlife careers. We are talking about the most talented portion of your talent bench. And so for me, it's a no-brainer. If you want to have the best people, if you want to win the war on talent, you need to have a workplace and an environment that actually is attractive to those people who you want to attract, which is the best people. I think this is the beginning of something. Basically, this train is in motion. It's going in the right direction. It is slow, as things do in the beginning. It's slow, But I think it's inevitable. We are moving in that direction where in 10 years, women's health will not be niche. It will be mainstream.
Okay, so you call this the $1 billion blind spot. Where do you think the money is going to flow? What do you see as the sort of most obvious recipients of that capital when people start waking up?
First of all, I don't think that capital will be flowing into women's health because it's because people feel, oh, it's the right thing to do, or it's nice to do it, it's good for women. I don't think that's going to be the case. That's going to be the main driver. I think capital is going to flow into women's health because it's flowing into science, it's flowing into innovation, and it's flowing into precision. So a couple of weeks ago, I wrote an article, and it's a simple example which I think every woman listening would have lived through. If you grew up in the 90s, you probably remember one of those posters that were in the schools and or definitely in the gym. And it said, 150 minutes of moderate exercise for a healthy heart. That rule was everywhere. And it was treated like gospel. It was neat, it was universal. It was one of the things that's unquestionable. I think what no one mentioned, well, at least not to me, back then was that the evidence behind that rule was almost entirely based on male physiology. And then just a study came out in Nature Cardiovascular Research, and I wrote about that basically set that whole guideline on fire because researchers looked at accelerometer data from almost 90,000 adults in the UK, in the biobank. So not self-reported exercise, but tracking actual movement. And then they tracked cardiovascular outcomes. And what they found was astonishing. Women achieved the same and sometimes greater heart health protection as men with half the exercise. And so women's heart responded to movement more efficiently, more quickly, and with a different risk reduction curve than men's. So it turns out this universal 150-minute rule is not universal at all. So when I think about where capital will be flowing, who will be the beneficiaries of capital flowing into women's health, I don't necessarily mean femtech or reproductive health. I'm talking specifically about precision medicine, gender specific medicine that delivers precision medicine for all. Because women's bodies behave differently at a cellular level, our heart, our brains, our immune system, and our hormones. So I think this is where we're going to see capital flowing into. But it's not just about women's health. If I take cardiovascular disease as a case in point, cardiovascular disease is the number one killer of men and women worldwide. And we know today, scientifically, that estrogen has an impact. It has receptors in the heart at cellular level. So estrogen impacts the heart at cellular level in a particular way. There are certain receptors. We don't fully understand the mechanisms, or at least I don't, but this is something that researchers are looking into and working on. So the better we know, the impact of estrogen, at cellular level in the heart, the better we are able to tailor diagnostics, preventive medicine, and treatment for women, but not just for women, also for men, because men also have estrogen. And so the more we know about estrogen and its, the impact, how it works in the heart, how it impacts the heart, then the better we can create diagnostics, preventive, treatment also for men, the better we can tailor it. And in a way, it's why I struggle a little bit with the term women's health, because it's at the end of the day, it's not really women's health, it's precision health for all.
Yeah.
And that I think is going to be the big beneficiary of investment and capital as we go further. I mean, we only need to look at last year in 2024. We had about $10.7 billion flowing into women's health. And by women's health, I mean also conditions that affect men and women, but affect women differently, like cardiovascular disease, or affect women disproportionately, like autoimmune or mental health conditions. The bulk of that money that flowed in last year was really towards conditions that are more diagnostics, biopharma, oncology. So really more of conditions that affect men and women as opposed to, say, reproductive health, or female specific conditions. So I think that's the trend. That's where the trend is going, towards more precision, personalized care. So I think if I was to hazard a guess about where the money will be flowing to, the big beneficiaries, I would say it's where diagnostics meets prevention. I would say it will be in the integration of verticals. So not just one vertical, but if we think about, say, where cardiovascular meets hormonal health, for example, so that is where I think it'll be the integration of verticals as opposed to standalone. But that'll be my prediction.
So it's so funny because as you're talking about estrogen in the heart, I totally get it. And that's where I can see people doing research. But progesterone works in the heart too. There's receptors for
Exactly.
progesterone and for men as well. And
Yes.
the science, just like, I don't know, mainstream science and medicine doesn't seem to care about progesterone. So there's all these weird gaps already, I
Yes.
find. And
Yes.
this is one of them where, like, why wouldn't someone be looking into progesterone and estrogen? But anyway, I don't know. Do you find these little gaps that don't make much sense? Harming the whole situation, kind of.
Yes, there are. And I think that's also why I truly believe that in 10 years, we are going to have, I mean, it will be more mainstream because there's just so many gaps. There's so many pockets
Mm.
that, everywhere you look, there are pockets of gaps. And I think what gives me hope and what makes me optimistic is that and I do quite a bit of work with the universities here in Switzerland. They've got it's really an amazing fertile ground for innovation. And so what gives me hope is when I look at, say, the research, the scientific community, there is no shortage of researchers who are interested in understanding, gender specific medicine. How does the physiology, men versus women, work? There is no shortage of that. And that gives me a lot of hope. There is also no shortage of innovators and entrepreneurs who are willing to step in. They're doing a PhD on something obscure that I've never heard about, and I speak to them and just their eyes, the fire lights up and you can see how excited they are to try to solve this problem or to understand, this phenomena and turn that into an investable product. So that's also very exciting and it gives me a lot of optimism. There's a lot of people out there who are innovating because actually when I kind of started out in, looking at women's health a bit more closely, I think one of the first questions I used to hear from people was, where are you even going to find things to invest into? Is anybody kind of working in this space? Okay, yes, people are. So that gives me a lot of hope. I think and this is where we try to solve, with the Femme Health Alliance, is really what we have is the lack of capital to fund these solutions. If you're running a wet lab, which you need to in order to run clinical experiments, that costs money. This is why we focus on the finance aspect to say, how can we connect patient capital, mission aligned capital to, this work, uh, this very important work that researchers need to do, that innovators need to work on at an early stage so that we can, if you like, build the pipeline from the ground up, so that we can have more and more solutions that solve for women's health. But yeah, there is a lot of opportunity in this space. But I think what keeps me happy is that there are people who are willing to invest time and energy and resources to close these gaps.
Yeah. I mean, they're not always starting their own companies, right? That's the hard part. Is like there's someone toiling, but maybe they don't have the entrepreneur mind. Then you have the person who wants to make a company that does have the entrepreneur mind, but they have to find the person who has the big idea. It's like all these little sort of not little, big barriers. Okay, you wrote a piece that I
Yeah.
thought was really interesting. The $18 billion deal, Blackstone and TPG, two private equity firms, acquired Hologic. So that is a medical technology company. and an American medical technology company, and they sell medical devices and diagnostics and imaging. And you were saying, hey, this is where it's like testing and diagnostics and information. And I thought that was so interesting because I do feel like testing, especially in the perimenopause and menopause space, is getting a lot of attention and is getting a lot of the products are coming out of that line. And it's a pretty controversial topic that I would say it's another gap where medicine thinks you don't need to test. The guiding bodies say don't test. But then there's a whole bunch of people, forward thinking, integrative, naturopathic, who do test. But underlying it all is our data. So they're realizing that our data is important and the money's flowing into, and this was the point of your really good Substack about this money is flowing into this information. And it's not necessarily bad, but I just wondered what you thought about that. If that was, is that a good thing? Is that something that we need to be careful of?
It's a good point. No, it's so first of all, it's very exciting. I thought that deal was very exciting. It will close in January, so it's still ongoing, but it's very exciting for several reasons. And the first reason is that it's what it signals, right? When you speak to a lot of investors, as I do, about deploying capital in women's health, I think one of the things that you hear is there aren't really a lot of exits in women's health. And, we all say we want impact, right? But the truth of the matter is, and I do tend to lean a bit transactional in my approach, but the truth of the matter is that if I went to my LPs and I said to them, guys, it's been 5 years. I didn't make you any money, but I made you a lot of impact. They'll throw me out of the room. That's just God's honest truth. So the financial return incentive is very important. So one of the things that holds investors back from engaging with the space is, well, there haven't been a lot of exits. And if there are not a lot of exits, then I don't see how I'm going to get my money back, let alone make a profit on it. And so this deal signals that there can be exits in women's health and they can be massive exits in women's health. So that's really important
Okay.
as a signal. I think the second thing is it's also a signaling, but from a different point of view. And I wrote about this. He said, when this deal was announced, the mainstream media called it the largest med tech deal of the decade. It wasn't. It was more than that. It was the moment, in my view, it was a moment that women's health became infrastructure for a number of reasons. I think that it's in a very flowery language, I almost feel that it is the moment that it was a cultural signal wrapped up in a balance sheet. It's basically saying this sector is legitimate. Because let's make no mistake about it, Blackstone, the largest private equity firm in the world, didn't buy women's health assets because they felt it was the right thing to do. They did it because it makes business sense. We're talking about 51% of the world's population suddenly becoming a fixed asset, whether we like it or not. The forces of demographic change mean that we need more screenings, more ultrasounds, more MRIs, more of these screenings just to kind of, stay healthy and catch things before they become a problem. And so what they were really buying into is steady recurring cash flows. And that's important. So women's health can give you that steady recurring cash flows. It's especially in a high interest rate world, you basically pick up, it's like having a fixed income asset. So that's a good thing. From a signaling point of view, it signals that women's health is a legitimate space where there are financial returns to be made because these guys didn't buy it because they think it's a moral thing to do. To your question around, what does this mean? I think it's a good thing because the more of these high profile deals that we see, and my view, and I think this is my thesis, I think we're going to see more and more of these deals happening over the next years and decade. And this is why I think women's health is going to go mainstream. Because if we really think about it, we haven't had gender specific medicine forever because women were excluded from most of the trials. It's just only in 93 that women started being included. So if we think about women's health, the science is still very young. We only have around about 25 years of scientific data since 93 when, women started being included in trials. That's one generation of science. If you compare that to say oncology, which has had 50 years of or more of compounding research, we are really at the very early innings when it comes to women's health, which means as the science compounds, we have more evidence backed or evidence readiness that can be deployed into solutions that become investable. So this is a good thing. And I think that as we have more of these evidence ready solutions that can be investable, we will see more and more companies coming in, more and more of these big deals happening. Why? It's very simple, Anne Marie. If we think about it, once the science has been proven, whoever controls the rails controls the cash flow. So once the science is proven, this is why I think that we're going to see more and more of these deals, and this is just the beginning. But is this a good thing or a bad thing? It's a good thing because the more of these deals happen, the more it sends a signal. And then we have more investors and more capital coming into the space. That is a good thing. We need all the capital we can get to advance solutions in women's health. But I think there also needs to be a degree of, humility and governance around this because when, women's health becomes digitized, then that same data set that we use to unlock precision care, because data is everything. With your data, with my data, I can have the benefit of having solutions that are tailored for me. But at the same time, that data set can entrench exclusion. If certain groups of people are not properly represented or, then we can entrench exclusion depending on who governs it. And so there is an ethical standpoint that needs to be taken into account here. With all humility, I don't know what the right governance model would be, but we do need to have some sort of guardrails in place so that as we learn more, and we gather more data about women, we don't get to a point where we inadvertently create more exclusion for certain groups of people.
That's a very good point. Well, it feels like they are starting to see us anyway, in a way that, it's interesting. As a young woman, I just grew up thinking this demographic that I'm in, you're nothing. You just heard about it all the time. Like I remember hearing, there's no movies or television shows for women because no one will go see them. And
yes.
Now what we see is an explosion, and we do go see them and we do watch them and we do pay for them. And that's just, it feels like it was just a male idea of men running things. And we've all worked in organizations where we've seen people make decisions that weren't really based on the reality. It was based on what people perceived the reality to be. And we may not be feeling well in midlife, but a lot of us have economic power to drive this stuff. So I think that's really interesting. Absolutely. So with Femme Health Alliance, you're informing and you're educating, but you're also connecting and actually working in investment. Can you just explain that part a little bit?
Yes. So what we do is we created this ecosystem, which is really investor first and investor focused, because, as I mentioned, where we really see the gaps in women's health is the capital. There's no shortage of people who are interested in, researching and coming up with, interesting solutions. Capital is really the problem. So we created this ecosystem, which is really for investors to, number one, create awareness about the investment opportunities. And the key message and the key word there is investment, because this is not charity. We're not speaking about philanthropy. Philanthropy does have its place, but we're not speaking about philanthropy. We're not speaking about charity. And we're not saying do it because it's the right thing to do. We're saying there is potential for financial return in this space. So it's not just all about AI and software as a service. There is, in women's health, there is the opportunity for financial return. Also, and if that's interesting for you, you could also have a massive impact that touches millions of people's lives. So that's number one is awareness, because also what I found in my lots of conversations with investors was a lot of people just didn't really even know about the opportunity set in this place. And it was like, wow, I didn't know that. So I very quickly realized that even within the community that I was working with of investors, there wasn't that awareness as to the opportunities in this space, which I take for granted because I'm neck deep in it. So that was one thing we wanted to do, the awareness. But it's not just awareness, it's awareness that translates into action, which means once you are aware, how do you know, within women's health, where are the subsectors where we have the white spots, where are the subsectors which are evidence ready from a scientific point of view, where is the strategic buyers circling around. So, as an investor, if I invest into, I take an example, if I invest into, say, diagnostics, I know that several healthcare companies strategically are looking at diagnostics and are looking at beefing up their diagnostics portfolio. So that gives you a sense as to where the exits could be happening. So this is what we do at the Femme Health Alliance, really building that ecosystem around investors to, number one, make them aware of the opportunities within the space, but also number two, facilitate or support them in actually deploying capital into women's health.
I do think telehealth is an interesting area where
Yes.
it's done very well. What's your take on that? Is that just because the need was so great and they met it well, the companies that have done well?
No, absolutely. I fully agree with you. And I like to think of it like Facebook, for example. Facebook was not the first company that kind of connected people to each other. I think before Facebook came along, there was MySpace, there were a few others, Friends United and so on. I don't remember exactly. But I think telehealth is very interesting because of the confluence of factors that are coming together. And that's number one, like obviously technology, and the acceptance of telehealth. COVID-19 really helped to accelerate the acceptance of telehealth solutions. So and of course, with the technology we have today, you can scale your solution to lots of people who are not geographically in the same location. But I think if you had tried to do this, telehealth maybe 20 years ago, maybe the technology would not have been ripe to allow you to serve as many geographically dispersed people, but also, the cultural acceptance of telehealth solution was not really there. So I think given that the confluence of these two factors, the cultural and the technological, we are at a point which is, in my mind, it's like an inflection point for telehealth services. And I think we only begin to scratch the surface. I mean, in the US, I think there's some companies that do it really well and have been able to really grow and scale using telehealth as a base for the services they provide. But there's also still a lot of opportunity, particularly in, like the global South, where people live in very remote areas and maybe don't have access to even transport, to get to town, So I think there is still really a lot of room to go in terms of the deployment of telehealth solutions. So I fully agree with you.
Yeah, in the Middle East where I am too, I think it's a huge opportunity. I wish someone would grab it. Fantastic. I think you are one of the most exciting people to come along, and you've got it all organized, just like I would expect a organized banker mother to be. Thank you so much for breaking this down for us.
I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
Hotflash Inc. was created and is hosted by Ann Marie McQueen, produced and edited by Sonia Mack. The information contained in this podcast is intended for informational purposes only and is not intended for the purpose of diagnosing, treating, curing, or preventing any disease. Before using any products referenced on the podcast, consult with your healthcare provider, read all labels, and heed all directions and cautions that accompany the products. Information received through the podcast should not be used in place of a consultation or advice from a healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem, i.e. menopause or anything else, or any healthcare questions, please promptly see your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Ann Marie McQueen and any producers or editors, disclaim any responsibility from any possible adverse effects from the use of any information contained herein. Opinions of guests on this podcast are their own, and the podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about a guest's qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. This podcast is owned by Hotflash Inc. Media.